The accepted through the halls of the White Tower. Tapestries and paintings covered walls as white as the outside of the tower. Patterned tiles made the floor. Tower. Patterned tiles made the floor. The accepted's white dress was exactly like hers, except for 7 narrow bands of color at hem and cuffs. Egwene frowned looking at that dress. Since yesterday, Nynaeve had worn the accepted's dress, and she seemed to have no joy of it, nor of the golden ring, a serpent eating its own tail, that marked her level. The few times Egwene had been able to see the wisdom, Nynaeve's eyes had seemed shadowed, as if she had seen things she wished with all her heart not to have seen. "In here," the accepted said curtly, gesturing to a door. Named Pedra, she was a short, wiry woman, a little older than Nynaeve, and with a briskness always in her voice. "You're given this time because it is your first day, but I'll expect you in the scullery when the gong sounds high, and not 1 moment later." Egwene curtsied, then stuck out her tongue at the accepted's retreating back. It might have been only the evening before that Shiriam had finally put her name in the novice book, but already she knew she did not like Pedra. She pushed open the door and went in. The room was plain and small with white walls, and there was a young woman with reddish-gold hair spilling around her shoulders, sitting on one of 2 hard benches. The floor was bare. Novices did not get much use of rooms with carpets. Egwene thought the girl was about her own age, but there was a dignity and self-possession about her that made her seem older. The plainly cut novice dress appeared somehow more on her. Elegant, that was it. "My name is Elaine," she said. She tilted her head, studying Egwene. "And you are Egwene, from Emond's Field, in the 2 Rivers." She said it as if it had some significance, but went right on anyway. "Someone who has been here a little while is always assigned to a new novice for a few days to help her find her way. Sit, please." Egwene took the other bench, facing Elaine. "I thought the Aes Sedai would teach me now that I'm finally a novice, but all that's happened so far is that Pedra woke me a good 2 hours before first light and put me to sweeping the halls. She says I have to help wash dishes after dinner, too." Elaine grimaced. "I hate washing dishes. I never had to. Well, that doesn't matter. You will have training. From now on, you will be at training at this hour every day, as a matter of fact. From breakfast until high, then again from dinner to trine.
Excuse me.
If you are especially quick or especially slow, they may take you from supper to full as well, but that is usually for more chores." Elaine's blue eyes took on a thoughtful expression. "You were born with it, weren't you?" Egwene nodded. "Yes, I thought I felt it. So was I, born with it. Do not be disappointed if you did not know. You will learn to feel the ability in other women. I had the advantage of growing up around an Aes Sedai." Egwene wanted to ask about that. Who grows up with Aes Sedai? But Elaine went on. "And also do not be disappointed if it takes you some time before you can achieve anything. With the one power, I mean. Even the simplest thing takes a little time. Patience is a virtue that must be learned." Her nose wrinkled. "Shiriam Sedai always says that, and she does her best to make us all learn it too. Try to run when she says walk, and she'll have you in her study before you can blink." "I've had a few lessons already," Egwene said, trying to sound modest. She opened herself to saidar, that part of it was easier now, and felt the warmth suffuse her body. She decided to try the biggest thing she knew how to do. She stretched out her hand, and a glowing sphere formed over it, pure light. It wavered. She still could not manage to hold it steady, but it was there. Calmly, Elaine held out her hand, and a ball of light appeared above her palm. Hers flickered, too. After a moment, a faint light glowed all around Elaine. Egwene gasped, and her ball vanished. Elaine giggled suddenly, and her light went out, both the sphere and the light around her. "You saw it around me?" she said excitedly. "I saw it around you. Shiriam Sedai said I would eventually. This was the first time. For you too? Egwene nodded, laughing along with the other girl. I like you, Elaine. I think we're going to be friends. I think so too, Egwene. You are from the Two Rivers, from Emond's Field. Do you know a boy named Rand al'Thor? I know him. Abruptly, Egwene found herself remembering a tale Rand had told, a tale she had not believed, about falling off a wall into a garden and meeting... You're the daughter heir of Andor, she gasped. Yes, Elaine said simply. If Shiriam Sedai as much as heard I'd mentioned it, I think she would have me into her study before I finished talking. Everyone talks about being called to Shiriam's study, even the accepted. Does she scold so fiercely? She seems kindly to me. Elaine hesitated, and when she spoke, it was slowly, not meeting Egwene's eye. She keeps a willow switch on her desk. She says if you can't learn to follow the rules in a civilized way, she will teach you another way. There are so many rules for novices. It is very hard not to break some of them, she finished. But that's horrible. I'm not a child, and neither are you. I won't be treated as one. But we are children. The Aes Sedai, the full sisters, are the grown women. The accepted are the young women, old enough to be trusted without someone looking over their shoulders every moment. And novices are the children, to be protected and cared for, guided in the way they should go, and punished when they do what they should not. That is the way Shiriam Sedai explains it. No one is going to punish you over your lessons, not unless you try something you've been told not to. It is hard not to try sometimes. You will find you want to channel as much as you want to breathe. But if you break too many dishes because you are daydreaming when you should be washing, if you're disrespectful to an accepted, or leave the tower without permission, or speak to an Aes Sedai before she speaks to you, or... The only thing to do is the best you can. There isn't anything else to do. It sounds almost as if they're trying to make us want to leave, Egwene protested. They aren't. But then again they are. Egwene, there are only 40 novices in the tower. Only 40. And no more than 7 or 8 will become accepted. That is not enough, Shiriam Sedai says. She says there are not enough Aes Sedai now to do what needs to be done. But the tower cannot lower its standards. The Aes Sedai cannot take a woman as a sister if she does not have the ability and the strength and the desire. They can't give the ring and the shawl to one who cannot channel the power well enough, or who will allow herself to be intimidated, or who will turn back when the road turns rough. Training and testing take care of the channeling, and for strength and desire, well, if you want to go, they will let you. Once you know enough that you won't die of ignorance. I suppose, Egwene said slowly, Shiriam told us some of that. I never thought about there not being enough Aes Sedai, though. She has a theory. She says we have culled humankind. You know about culling? Cutting out of the herd those animals that have traits you don't like? Egwene nodded impatiently. No one could grow up around sheep without knowing about culling the flock. Shiriam Sedai says that with the Red Ajah hunting down men who could channel for 3,000 years, we are culling the ability to channel out of us all. I would not mention this around any Reds if I were you. Shiriam Sedai has been in more than one shouting match over it, and we are only novices. I won't. Elaine paused and then said, Is Rand well? Egwene felt a sudden stab of jealousy. Elaine was very pretty, but over it came a stronger stab of fear. She went over the little she knew of Rand's one meeting with the daughter heir, reassuring herself Elaine could not possibly know that Rand could channel. Egwene? He is as well as he can be. I hope he is the wool-headed idiot. He was riding with some Shienaran soldiers the last I saw him. Shienarans? He told me he was a shepherd. She shook her head. I find myself thinking of him at the oddest times. Elida thinks he is important in some way. She didn't come right out and say so, but she ordered a search for him, and she was in a fury when she learned he had left Caemlyn. Elida? Elida Sedai, my mother's counselor. She is Red Ajah, but Mother seems to like her despite that. Egwene's mouth felt dry. Red Ajah. and interested in Rand. I don't know where he is now. He left Shinar, and I don't think he was going back. Elaine gave her a level look. I would not tell Elida where to find him if I knew Egwene. He has done no wrong that I know, and I fear she wants to use him in some manner. Anyway, I've not seen her since the day we arrived, with white cloaks dogging our trail. They are still camped on the Dragon Mount side. Abruptly, she bounded to her feet. Let us talk of happier things. There are 2 others here who know Rand, and I would like you to meet one of them. She took Egwene's hand and pulled her out of the room. 2 girls? Rand seems to meet a lot of girls. Still drawing Egwene down the corridor, Elaine studied her. Yes, well, one of them is a lazy chit named Elsa Grinwell. I don't think she will be here long. She shirks her chores, and she is always sneaking off to watch the warders practice their swords. She says Rand came to her father's farm with a friend of his, Matt. It seems they put notions of the world beyond the next village into her head, and she ran away to come be an Aes Sedai. Men, Egwene muttered. I dance a few dances with a nice boy, and Rand goes around looking like a dog with a sore tooth, but he... She cut off as a man stepped into the hall ahead of them. Beside her, Elaine stopped, too, and her hand tightened on Egwene's. There was nothing alarming about him, aside from the suddenness of his appearance. He was tall and handsome, short of middle years, with long, dark, curling hair, but his shoulders sagged, and there was sadness in his eyes. He made no move toward Egwene and Elaine, only stood looking at them until one of the accepted appeared at his shoulder. You should not be in here, she said to him, not unkindly. I wanted to walk. His voice was deep and as sad as his eyes. You can walk out in the garden, where you are supposed to be. The sunshine will be good for you. The man rumbled a bitter laugh. With 2 or 3 of you watching my every move, you're just afraid I'll find a knife. At the look in the accepted's eyes, he laughed again. For myself, woman. For myself. Lead me to your garden and your watching eyes. The accepted touched his arm lightly and led him away. No gain, Elaine said when he was gone. The false dragon. He has been gentle, Egwene. He is no more dangerous than any other man now, but I remember seeing him before when it took 6 Aes Sedai to keep him from wielding the power and destroying us all. She shivered. Egwene did too. That was what the Red Ajah would do to Rand. Do they always have to be gentle? She asked. Elaine stared at her, mouth agape, and she quickly added, It is just that I'd think the Aes Sedai would find some other way to deal with them. Anaya and Moiraine both said the greatest feats of the Age of Legends required men and women working together with the power. I just thought they'd try to find a way. Well, do not let any Red sister hear you thinking it aloud. Egwene, they did try. For 300 years after the White Tower was built, they tried. They gave up because there was nothing to find. Come on, I want you to meet Min. Not in the garden where Loghain is going, thank the light. The name sounded vaguely familiar to Egwene, and when she saw the young woman, she knew why. There was a narrow stream in the garden with a low stone bridge over it, and Min sat cross-legged on the wall of the bridge. She wore a man's tight breeches and baggy shirt, and with her dark hair cut short, she could almost pass for a boy, though an uncommonly pretty one. A gray coat lay beside her on the coping. I know you, Egwene said. You worked at the inn in Bearlawn. A light breeze riffled the water beneath the bridge, and gray wings warbled in the trees of the garden. Min smiled. And you were one of those who brought the Dark Friends down on us to burn it down. No, don't worry. The messenger who came to fetch me brought enough gold that Master Fitch is building it back again twice as big. Good morning, Elaine. Not slaving over your lessons? Or over some pots? It was said in a bantering tone as between friends, as Elaine's answering grin proved. I see Sheriam has not yet managed to get you into a dress. Min's laugh was wicked. I'm no novice. She made her voice squeaky. Yes, Aes Sedai, no Aes Sedai.
May I sweep another floor, Aes Sedai?
I, she said, resuming her own low voice, clothe myself the way I want. She turned to Egwene. Is Rand well? Egwene's mouth tightened. He should wear ram's horns like a Trolloc, she thought angrily. I was sorry when your inn caught fire, and I'm glad Master Fitch was able to rebuild. Why have you come to Tar Valon? It's clear you do not mean to be an Aes Sedai. Min arched an eyebrow in what Egwene was sure was amusement. She likes him, Elaine explained. I know. Min glanced at Egwene, and for an instant Egwene thought she saw sadness or regret in her eyes. I am here, Min said carefully, because I was sent for, and was given the choice between riding and coming tied in a sack. You always exaggerate it, Elaine said. Shiriam Sedai saw the letter, and she says it was a request. Min sees things, Egwene. That's why she's here, so the Aes Sedai can study how she does it. It isn't the power. Request, Min snorted. When an Aes Sedai requests your presence, it's like a command from a queen with 100 soldiers to back it up. Everybody sees things, Egwene said. Elaine shook her head. Not like Min. She sees auras around people and images. Not all the time, Min put in. Not around everybody. And she can read things about you from them, though I'm not sure she always tells the truth. She said I'd have to share my husband with 2 other women, and I'd never put up with that. She just laughs and says it was never her idea of how to run things either. But she said I would be a queen before she knew who I was. She said she saw a crown, and it was the rose crown of Andor. Despite herself, Egwene asked, What do you see when you look at me? Min glanced at her. A white flame and, all sorts of things. I don't know what it means. She says that a great deal, Elaine said dryly. One of the things she said she saw looking at me was a severed hand. Not mine, she says. She claims she does not know what it means either. Because I don't, Min said. I don't know what half of it means. The crunch of boots on the walk brought them around to look at 2 young men with their shirts and coats across their arms, leaving sweaty chests bare and scabbarded swords in their hands. Egwene found herself staring at the most handsome man she'd ever seen. Tall and slim, but hard, he moved with a cat-like grace. She suddenly realized he was bowing over her hand. She'd not even felt him take it in his, and fumbled in her mind for the name she had heard. Galad, she murmured. His dark eyes stared back into hers. He was older than she, older than Rand. At the thought of Rand, she gave a start and came to herself. And I am Gawain, the other young man grinned. Since I don't think you heard the first time. Min was grinning too, and only Elaine wore a frown. Egwene abruptly remembered her hand, still held by Galad, and freed it. If your duties allow, Galad said, I would like to see you again, Egwene. We could walk, or if you obtain permission to leave the tower, we could picnic outside the city. That would be nice. She was uncomfortably aware of the others, Min and Gawain still with their amused grins, Elaine still with her scowl. She tried to settle herself, to think of Rand. He's so beautiful. She gave a jump, half afraid she'd spoken aloud. Until then. Finally taking his eyes from hers, Galad bowed to Elaine. Sister. Lithe as a blade, he strolled on across the bridge. That one, Min murmured, peering after him, will always do what is right, no matter who it hurts. Sister, Egwene said. Elaine's scowl had lessened only slightly. I thought he was the way you're frowning. She'd thought Elaine was jealous, and she still was not sure. I am not his sister, Elaine said firmly. I refuse to be. Our father was his father, Gawain said dryly. You cannot deny that unless you want to call Mother a liar, and that, I think, would take more nerve than we have between us. For the first time, Egwene realized that he had the same reddish-gold hair as Elaine, though darkened and curled by sweat. Min is right, Elaine said. Galad has not the smallest part of humanity in him. He takes right above mercy or pity, or he is no more human than a Trolloc. Gawain's grin came back. I do not know about that. Not from the way he was looking at Egwene here. He caught her look and his sister's, and held up his hands as if to fend them off with his sheathed sword. Besides, he has the best hand with a sword I've ever seen. The warders only need show him something once, and he's learned it. They sweat me nearly to death to learn half what Galad does without trying. And being good with a sword is enough? Elaine sniffed. Men. Egwene, as you may have guessed, this disgracefully unclothed lummox is my brother. Gawain, Egwene knows Randall Thor. She's from the same village. Is she? Was he really born in the Two Rivers, Egwene? Egwene made herself nod calmly. What does he know? Of course he was. I grew up with him. Of course, Gawain said slowly. Such a strange fellow. A shepherd, he said, though he never looked or acted like any shepherd I ever saw. Strange. I've met all sorts of people, and they've met Randall Thor. Some do not even know his name, but the description could not be anyone else, and he's shifted every one of their lives. There was an old farmer who came to Caemlyn just to see Loghain, when Loghain was brought through on his way here. Yet the farmer stayed to stand for Mother when the riots started, because of a young man off to see the world who made him think there was more to life than his farm, Randall Thor. You could almost think he was ta'veren. Elaida is certainly interested in him. I wonder if meeting him will shift our lives in the pattern. Egwene looked at Elaine and Min. She was sure they could not have a clue that Rand really was ta'veren. She had never really thought about that part of it before. He was Rand, and he had been cursed with the ability to channel. But ta'veren did move people, whether they wanted to be moved or not. I really do like you, she said abruptly, including both girls in her gesture. I want to be your friend. And I want to be yours, Elaine said. Impulsively, Egwene hugged her, and then Min jumped down, and the three of them stood there on the bridge, hugging one another all together. We three are tied together, Min said, and we cannot let any man get in the way of that, not even him. Would one of you mind telling me what this is all about? Gawain inquired gently. You would not understand, his sister said, and the three girls all caught a fit of the giggles. Gawain scratched his head, then shook it. Well, if it has anything to do with Randall Thor, be sure you don't let Elaida hear of it. She has been at me like a white-cloaked questioner 3 times since we arrived. I do not think she means him any. He gave a start. There was a woman crossing the garden, a woman in a red-fringed shawl. Name the Dark One, he quoted, and he appears. I do not need another lecture about wearing my shirt when I'm out of the practice yards. Good morning to you all. Elaida spared a glance for the departing Gawain as she came up the bridge. She was a handsome woman rather than beautiful, Egwene thought, but that ageless look marked her as surely as her shawl. Only the newest maid sisters lacked it. When her gaze swept over Egwene, pausing only a moment, Egwene suddenly saw hardness in the Aes Sedai. She'd always thought of Moiraine as strong, steel under silk, but Elaida dispensed with the silk. Elaida, Elaine said, this is Egwene. She was born with the seed in her too, and she has already had some lessons, so she is as far along as I am. Elaida? The Aes Sedai's face was blank and unreadable. In Caemlyn, child, I am counselor to the Queen, your mother, but this is the White Tower, and you a novice. Min made as if to go, but Elaida stopped her with a sharp, Stay, girl, I would speak with you. I've known you all my life, Elaida, Elaine said incredulously. You watched me grow up, and made the gardens bloom in winter so I could play. Child, there you were the daughter heir. Here you are a novice. You must learn that. You will be great one day, but you must learn. Yes, Aes Sedai. Egwene was astounded. If someone had snubbed her so before others, she would have been in a fury. Now, off with both of you. A gong began to toll, deep and sonorous, and Elaida tilted her head. The sun stood halfway to its pinnacle. "Hi," Elaida said. "You must hurry if you do not want further admonishment. And Elaine, see the Mistress of Novices in her study after your chores. A novice does not speak to Aes Sedai unless bidden to. Run, both of you. You will be late. Run!" They ran, holding their skirts up. Egwene looked at Elaine. Elaine had 2 spots of color in her cheeks, and a determined look on her face. "I will be Aes Sedai," Elaine said softly, but it sounded like a promise. Behind them, Egwene heard the Aes Sedai begin. "I'm given to understand, girl, that you were brought here by Moiraine Sedai." She wanted to stay and listen, to hear if Elaida asked about Rand, but High rang through the White Tower, and she was summoned to chores. She ran as she had been commanded to run. "I will be Aes Sedai," she growled. Elaine flashed a quick smile of understanding, and they ran faster. Min's shirt clung to her when she finally left the bridge, not sweat from the sun, but from the heat of Elaida's questions. She looked over her shoulder to make sure the Aes Sedai was not following her, but Elaida was nowhere in sight. How did Elaida know that Moiraine had summoned her? Min had been sure that was a secret known only to her, Moiraine, and Shiriam. And all those questions about Rand. It had not been easy keeping a smooth face and a steady eye, while telling an Aes Sedai to her face that she had never heard of him and knew nothing of him. What does she want with him? Light, what does Moiraine want with him? What is he? Light, I don't want to fall in love with a man I've only met once, and a farm boy at that. "Moiraine, the light blind you," she muttered. "Whatever you brought me here for, come out from wherever you're hiding and tell me so I can go." The only answer was the sweet song of the Grey Wings. With a grimace, she went in search of a place to cool off.
Chapter 25. Cairhien. The city of Cairhien lay across hills against the river Alguenya, and Rand's first sight of it came from the hills to the north by the light of the midday sun. Elricaine Tavalin and the 50 Cairhienan soldiers still seemed like guards to him, the more since crossing the bridge at the Galen. They became more stiff the further south they rode. But Loial and Hurin did not appear to mind, so he tried not to. He studied the city, as large as any he had seen. Fat ships and broad barges filled the river, and tall granaries sprawled along the far bank. But Cairhien seemed to be laid out in a precise grid behind its high gray walls. Those walls themselves made a perfect square, with one side hard along the river. In just as exact a pattern, towers rose within the walls, soaring as much as 20 times the height of the wall, yet even from the hills Rand could see that each one ended in a jagged top. Outside the city walls, surrounding them from riverbank to riverbank, lay a warren of streets, crisscrossing at all angles and teeming with people. Foregate, Rand knew it was called, from Hurin. Once there had been a market village for every city gate, but over the years they had all grown into one, a hodgepodge of streets and alleys growing up every which way. As Rand and the others rode into those dirt streets, Tavalin put some of his soldiers to clearing a path through the throng, shouting and urging their horses forward as if to trample any who did not get out of the way quickly. People moved aside with no more than a glance, as if it were an everyday occurrence. Rand found himself smiling, though. The Foregate's people's clothes were shabby more often than not, yet much of it was colorful, and there was a raucous bustle of life to the place. Hawkers cried their wares, and shopkeepers called for people to examine the goods displayed on tables before their shops. Barbers, fruit peddlers, knife sharpeners, men and women offering a dozen services and 100 things for sale, wandered through the crowds. Music drifted through the babel from more than one structure. At first Rand thought they were inns, but the signs out front all showed men playing flutes or harps, tumbling or juggling, and large as they were, they had no windows. Most of the buildings in Foregate seemed to be wood, however big they were, and a good many looked new, if poorly made. Rand gaped at several that stood 7 stories or more, They swayed slightly, though the people hurrying in and out did not seem to notice. Peasants, Tovelin muttered, staring straight ahead in disgust. Look at them, corrupted by outland ways. They should not be here. Where should they be? Rand asked. The Carianan officer glared at him and spurred his horse forward, flogging at the crowd with his quirt. Huron touched Rand's arm. It was the Aiel War, Lord Rand. He looked to make sure none of the soldiers were close enough to hear. Many of the farmers were afraid to go back to their lands near the spine of the world, and they all came here near enough. That's why Galdrian has the river full of grain barges up from Andor and Tyr. There's no crops coming from farms in the east because there aren't any farms anymore. Best not to mention it to a Carianan, though, my lord. They like to pretend the war never happened, or at least that they won it. Despite Tovelin's quirt, they were forced to halt while a strange procession crossed their path. Half a dozen men, beating tambours and dancing, led the way for a string of huge puppets, each half again as tall as the men who worked them with long poles. Giant crowned figures of men and women in long ornate robes bowed to the crowd amid the shapes of fanciful beasts, a lion with wings, a goat walking on its hind legs with two heads, both of which were apparently meant to be breathing fire from the crimson streamers hanging from the two mouths. Something that seemed to be half cat and half eagle, and another with a bear's head on a man's body, which Rand took to be a Trolloc. The crowd cheered and laughed as they pranced by. Man who made that never saw a Trolloc, Huron grumbled. Head's too big and it's too skinny. Likely didn't believe in them either, my lord, any more than in those other things. The only monsters these Foregate folk believe in are Aiel. Are they having a festival? Rand asked. He did not see any sign of it other than the procession, but he thought that there must be a reason for that. Tovelin ordered his soldiers forward again. No more than every day, Rand, Loyal said. Walking alongside his horse, the blanket-wrapped chest still wrapped to his saddle, the Ogier drew as many looks as the puppets had. Some even laughed and clapped as they had for the puppets. I fear Galdrian keeps his people quiet by entertaining them. He gives gleemen and musicians the king's gift, a bounty in silver to perform here in the Foregate, and he sponsors horse races down by the river every day. There are fireworks many nights, too. He sounded disgusted. Elder Hammond says Galdrian is a disgrace. He blinked, realizing what he had said, and looked around hurriedly to see if any of the soldiers had heard. None seemed to have. Fireworks, Huron said, nodding. The Illuminators have built a chapter house here, I've heard. The same as in Tamchico. I didn't half mind seeing the fireworks when I was here before. Rand shook his head. He had never seen fireworks elaborate enough to require even one illuminator. He had heard they only left Tamchico to put on displays for rulers. It was a strange place he was coming to. At the tall square archway of the city gate, Tovelin ordered a halt and dismounted by a squat stone building just inside the walls. It had arrow slits instead of windows, and a heavy iron-bound door. A moment, my Lord Rand, the officer said. Tossing his reins to one of the soldiers, he disappeared inside. With a wary look at the soldiers, they sat their horses rigidly in two long files. Rand wondered what they would do if he and Loyal and Huron tried to leave. He took the opportunity to study the city that lay before him. Cairhien proper was a sharp contrast to the chaotic bustle of the Foregate. Broad paved streets, wide enough to make the people in them seem fewer than they were, crossed each other at right angles. Just as in Tremoncienne, the hills had been carved and terraced to straight lines. Closed sedan chairs, some with small pennants bearing the sigil of a house, moved with deliberateness, and carriages rolled down the streets slowly. People went silently in dark clothes, with no bright colors except here and there slashes across the breast of coat or dress. The more slashes, the more proudly the wearer moved.
Right back.
But no one laughed or even smiled. The buildings on their terraces were all of stone, and the ornamentation was straight-lined and sharp-angled. There were no hawkers or peddlers in the streets, and even the shops seemed subdued, with only small signs and no wares displayed outside. He could see the great towers more clearly now. Scaffolds of lashed poles surrounded them, and workmen swarmed on scaffolding, laying new stones to push the towers higher still.
The topless towers of Gyrian,
Loyal murmured sadly.
Well, they were tall enough to warrant the name once. When the Aiel took Gyrian, about the time you were born, the towers burned and cracked and fell. I don't see any Ogier among the stonemasons. No Ogier could like working here. The Gyrianen want what they want without embellishment. But there were Ogier when I was here before.
Tobalin came out, trailing another officer and two clerks, one carrying a large wood-bound ledger and the other a tray with writing implements. The front of the officer's head was shaven like Tobalin's, though advancing baldness seemed to have taken more hair than the razor. Both officers looked from Rand to the chest hidden by Loyal's striped blanket and back again. Neither asked what was under the blanket. Tobalin had looked at it often on the way from Tremoncien, but he had never asked either. The balding man looked at Rand's sword, too, and pursed his lips for an instant. Tobalin gave the other officer's name as Asan Sonder, and announced loudly, Lord Rand of House Althor in Andor, and his man called Huron, with Loyal and Ogier of Stedding Shangtai. The clerk with the ledger opened it across his two arms, and Sonder wrote the names in a round hand. You must return to this guardhouse by this same hour tomorrow, my lord, Sonder said, leaving the sanding to the second clerk. And give the name of the inn where you are staying. Rand looked at the staid streets of Gyrian, then back at the liveliness of the foregate. Can you tell me the name of a good inn out there? He nodded to the foregate. Huron made a frantic "St," and leaned close. It would not be proper, Lord Rand, he whispered. If you stay in the foregate, being a lord and all, they'll be sure you are up to something. Rand could see the sniffer was right. Sunder's mouth had dropped open, and Tobalin's brows had risen at his question, and they were both still watching him intently. He wanted to tell them he was not playing their great game, but instead he said, We will take rooms in the city. We can go now? Of course, my Lord Rand. Sonder made a bow. But the inn? I will let you know when we find one. Rand turned red, then paused. Celine's note crackled in his pocket. I need to find a young woman from Gyrian, the Lady Celine. She is my age and beautiful. I don't know her house. Sonder and Tobalin exchanged looks. Then Sonder said, I will make inquiries, my lord. Perhaps I will be able to tell you something when you come tomorrow. Rand nodded and led Loyal and Huron into the city. They attracted little notice, though there were few riders. Even Loyal attracted almost none. The people seemed nearly ostentatious about minding their own business. Will they take it the wrong way? Rand asked Huron. My asking after Celine? Who can say with Cairhienin, Lord Rand? They seem to think everything has to do with Deus Daemar. Rand shrugged. He felt as if people were looking at him. He could not wait to get a good plain coat again and stop pretending to be what he was not. Huron knew several inns in the city, though his time in Cairhien had been spent mainly in the foregate. The sniffer led them to one called the Defender of the Dragon Wall, the sign bearing a crowned man with his foot on another man's chest and his sword at the man's throat. The fellow on his back had red hair. A hostler came to take their horses, darting quick looks at Rand and at Loyal when he thought he was not observed. Rand told himself to stop having fancies. Not everyone in the city could be playing this game of theirs, and if they were, he was no part of it. The common room was neat, with the tables laid out as strictly as the city, and only a few people at them. They glanced up at the newcomers, then back to their wine immediately. Rand had the feeling they were still watching, though, and listening. A small fire burned in the big fireplace, though the day was warming. The innkeeper was a plump, unctuous man with a single stripe of green across his dark gray coat. He gave a start at his first sight of them, and Rand was not surprised. Loyal with the chest in his arms, under its striped blanket, had to duck his head to make it in through the door. Huron was burdened with all their saddlebags and bundles, and his own red coat was a sharp contrast to the somber colors the people at the tables wore. The innkeeper took in Rand's coat and his sword, and his oily smile came back. He bowed, washing his smooth hands.
Forgive me, my lord. It was just that for a moment I took you for... Forgive me. My brain is not what it was. You wish rooms, my lord?
He added another, lesser bow for Loyal.
I am called Quail, my lord.
He thought I was Aiel, Rand thought sourly. He wanted to be gone from Cairhien, but it was the one place Ingtar might find them, and Selene had said she would wait for him in Cairhien. It took a little time for their rooms to be readied, Quail explaining with too many smiles and bows that it was necessary to move a bed for Loyal. Rand wanted them all to share a room again, but between the innkeeper's scandalized looks and Huron's insistence,
"We have to show these Cairhienin we know what's right as well as they do, Lord Rand."
They ended with two, one for him alone, with a connecting door. The rooms were much the same, except that theirs had two beds, one sized for an Ogier, while his had only one bed, and that almost as big as the other two, with massive square posts that nearly reached the ceiling. His tall-backed padded chair and the washstand were square and massive too, and the wardrobe standing against his wall was carved in a heavy, rigid style that made the thing look ready enough to fall over on him. A pair of windows siding his bed looked out on the street 2 floors below. As soon as the innkeeper left, Rand opened the door and admitted Loyal and Huron into his room. "This place gnaws at me," he told them. "Everybody looks at you as if they think you're doing something. I'm going back to the Foregate, for an hour anyway. At least the people laughed there. Which of you is willing to take the first watch on the Horn?"
I will stay,
Loyal said quickly.
I'd like a chance to do a little reading. Just because I didn't see any Ogier does not mean there are no stonemasons down from Stedding Tsofu. It is not far from the city.
I'd think you would want to meet them.
No, Rand. They asked enough questions the last time about why I was outside alone as it was. If they've had word from Stedding Shangtai, well, I will just rest here and read, I think.
Rand shook his head. He often forgot that Loyal had run away from home, in effect, to see the world. What about you, Huron? There's music in the Foregate, and people laughing. I'll wager no one is playing Deus Daemar there.
I would not be so certain of that myself, Lord Rand. In any case, I thank you for the invitation, but I think not. There's so many fights, and killings too, in the Foregate, that it stinks, if you know what I mean. Not that they're likely to bother a lord, of course. The soldiers would be down on them if they did. But if it pleases you, I would like to have a drink in the common room.
Huron, you don't need my permission for anything, you know that.
As you say, my lord.
The sniffer gave a suggestion of a bow. Rand took a deep breath. If they did not leave Cairhien soon, Huron would be bowing and scraping left and right. And if Mat and Perrin saw that, they would never let him forget it. I hope nothing delays Ingtar. If he doesn't come quickly, we'll have to take the Horn back to Fal Dara ourselves. He touched Selene's note through his coat. We will have to. Loyal, I'll come back so you can see some of the city.
I'd rather not risk it,
Loyal said. Huron accompanied Rand downstairs. As soon as they reached the common room, Quail was bowing in front of Rand, pushing a tray at him. 3 folded and sealed parchments lay on the tray. Rand took them, since that was what the innkeeper seemed to intend. They were a fine grade of parchment, soft and smooth to his touch. Expensive. What are these? He asked. Quail bowed again.
Invitations, of course, my lord, from 3 of the noble houses.
He bowed himself away. Who would send me invitations? Rand turned them over in his hand. None of the men at the tables looked up, but he had the feeling they were watching just the same. He did not recognize the seals. None was the crescent moon and stars Selene had used. Who would know I was here?
Everyone by now, Lord Rand,
Huron said quietly. He seemed to feel eyes watching too.
The guards at the gate would not keep their mouths closed about an outland lord coming to Cairhien.
The hostler, the innkeeper,
Everybody tells what they know, where they think it will do them the most good, my lord. With a grimace, Rand took 2 steps and hurled the invitations into the fire. They caught immediately. I am not playing Deus de Mar, he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Not even it has nothing to do with your great game. I am just here to wait for some friends. Euron caught his arm. Please, Lord Rand. His voice was an urgent whisper. Please, don't do that again. Again? You really think I'll receive more? I'm certain. Light, but you remind me of the time Tiva got so mad at a hornet buzzing around his ears, he kicked the nest. You've likely just convinced everyone in the room you're in some deep part of the game. It must be deep, as they'll see it, if you deny playing at all. Every lord and lady in Cairhien plays it. The sniffer glanced at Deal, curling blackly in the fire and winked. And you have surely made enemies of 3 houses. Not great houses. They would not have moved so quickly, but still noble. You must answer any more invitations you receive, my lord. Decline if you will, though they'll read things into whose invitations you do decline, and into whose you accept. Of course, if you decline them all, or accept them all, I'll have no part of it, Rand said quietly. We are leaving Cairhien as soon as we can. He thrust his fists into his coat pockets and felt Celine's note crumple. Pulling it out, he moved it on his coat front. As soon as we can, he muttered, putting it back in his pocket again. Have your drink, Euron. He stalked out angrily, not sure whether he was angry with himself, or with Cairhien and its great game, or Celine for vanishing, or Moraine. She had started it all, stealing his coats and giving him a lord's clothes instead. Even now that he called himself free of them, and Aes Sedai still managed to interfere in his life, and without even being there. He went back through the same gate by which he had entered the city, since that was the way he knew. A man standing in front of the guardhouse took note of him. His bright coat marked him out, as well as his height among the Cairhienin, and hurried inside, but Rand did not notice. The laughter and music of the foregate were pulling him on. If his gold-embroidered red coat made him stand out inside the walls, it fit right into the foregate. Many of the men milling through the crowded streets were dressed just as darkly as those in the city, but just as many wore coats of red or blue or green or gold, some bright enough to be a tinker's clothes. And even more of the women had embroidered dresses and colored scarves or shawls. Most of the finery was tattered and ill-fitting, as if made for someone else originally, but if some of those who wore it eyed his fine coat, none seemed to take it amiss. Once he had to stop for another procession of giant puppets. While the drummers beat their tambours and capered, a pig-faced Trolloc with tusks fought a man in a crown. After a few desultory blows, the Trolloc collapsed to laughter and cheers from the onlookers. Rand grunted. They don't die so easily as that. He glanced into one of the large windowless buildings, stopping to look through the door. To his surprise, it seemed to be one huge room open to the sky in the middle and lined with balconies, with a large dais at one end. He had never seen or heard of anything like it. People jammed the balconies in the floor, watching people perform on the dais. He peeked into others as he passed them and saw jugglers and musicians, any number of tumblers, and even a gleeman with his cloak of patches, declaiming a story from the Great Hunt of the Horn in sonorous voice high chant. That made him think of Tom Merrilin, and he hurried on. Memories of Tom were always sad. Tom had been a friend who had died for him, while I ran away and let him die. In another of the big structures, a woman in voluminous white robes appeared to make things vanish from one basket and appear in another, then disappear from her hands in great puffs of smoke. The crowd watching her oohed and awed loudly. 2 coppers, my good lord, a ratty little man in the doorway said. 2 coppers to see the Aes Sedai. I don't think so. Rand glanced back at the woman. A white dove had appeared in her hands. Aes Sedai? No. He gave the ratty man a small bow and left. He was making his way through the throng, wondering what to see next, when a deep voice, accompanied by the plucking of a harp, drifted out from a doorway with the sign of a juggler over it.
Cold blows the wind down Shara Pass. Cold lies the grave unmarked. Yet every year at Sunday, upon those piled stones appears a single rose, one crystal teardrop, like dew upon the petals, laid by the fair hand of Dunsinin. For she keeps fast to the bargain made by Rogosh Eagle-Eye. The voice drew Rand like a rope. He pushed through the doorway as applause arose within. 2 coppers, my good lord, said a rat-faced man, who could have been twin to the other. 2 coppers to see. Rand dug out some coins and thrust them at the man. He walked on in a daze, staring at the man bowing on the dais to the clapping of his listeners, cradling his harp in one arm, and with the other spreading his patch-covered cloak as if to trap all the sound they made. He was a tall man, lanky and not young, with long mustaches as white as the hair on his head, and when he straightened and saw Rand, the eyes that widened were sharp and blue. Tom. Rand's whisper was lost in the noise of the crowd. Holding Rand's eye, Tom Maryland nodded slightly toward a small door beside the dais. Then he was bowing again, smiling and basking in the applause. Rand made his way to the door and through it. It was only a small hallway with 3 steps leading up to the dais. In the other direction from the dais, Rand could see a juggler practicing with colored balls and 6 tumblers limbering themselves. Tom appeared on the steps, limping as though his right leg did not bend as well as it had. He eyed the juggler and the tumblers, blew out his mustaches disdainfully, and turned to Rand.
All they want to hear is the great hunt of the Horn. You would think with the news from Haddon Merk and Soldaia, one of them would ask for the Koreathon cycle. Well, maybe not that, but I'd pay myself to tell something else.
He looked Rand up and down.
You look as if you're doing well, boy.
He fingered Rand's collar and pursed his lips.
Very well.
Rand could not help laughing. I left Whitebridge sure you were dead. Moraine said you were still alive, but I... Like Tom, it's good to see you again. I should have gone back to help you.
Bigger fool if you had, boy. That Fade...
He looked around. There was no one close enough to hear, but he lowered his voice anyway.
Had no interest in me. It left a little present of a stiff leg and ran off after you and Matt. All you could have done was die.
He paused, looking thoughtful.
Moraine said I was still alive, did she? Is she with you, then?
Rand shook his head. To his surprise, Tom seemed disappointed.
Too bad, in a way. She's a fine woman, even if she is...
He left it unsaid.
So it was Matt or Perrin she was after. I won't ask which. They were good boys, and I don't want to know.
Rand shifted uneasily and gave a start when Tom fixed him with a bony finger.
What I do want to know is, do you still have my harp and flute? I want them back, boy. What I have now are not fit for a pig to play.
I have them, Tom. I'll bring them to you, I promise. I can't believe you are alive. And I can't believe you aren't in Ilion. The great hunt setting out. The prize for the best telling of the great hunt of the Horn. You were dying to go. Tom snorted.
After Whitebridge? Likely I'd die if I did go. Even if I could have reached the boat before it sailed, Billman and his whole crew would be spreading the tale all over Ilion about how I was being chased by Trollocs. If they saw the Fade, or heard of it, before Doman cut his lines... Most Ilianers think Trollocs and Fades are fables, but enough others might want to know why a man was pursued by them to make Ilion somewhat more the uncomfortable.
Tom, I have so much to tell you. The Gleeman cut him off.
Later, boy.
He was exchanging glares down the length of the hall with the narrow-faced man from the door.
If I don't go back and tell another, he will no doubt send the juggler out, and that lot will tear the hall down around our heads. You come to the bunch of grapes just beyond the Jangai Gate. I have a room there. Anyone can tell you where to find it. I'll be there in another hour or so. One more tale will have to satisfy them.
He started back up the steps, flinging over his shoulder.
And bring my harp and my flute.
Chapter 26. Discord. Rand darted through the common room of the Defender of the Dragon Wall and hurried upstairs, grinning at the startled look the innkeeper had given him. Rand wanted to grin at everything. Tom's alive. He flung open the door to his room and went straight to the wardrobe. Loyal and Huron put their heads in from the other room, both in their shirt sleeves and with pipes in their teeth trailing thin streams of smoke. "Has something happened, Lord Rand?" Huron asked anxiously. Rand slung the bundle made from Tom's cloak on his shoulder. "The best that could, next to Ingtar coming. Tom Merrilin's alive, and he's here in Cairhien."
"The Gleeman you told me about?"
Loyal said.
"That is wonderful, Rand. I would like to meet him."
"Then come with me, if Huron's willing to keep watch a while." "It will be a pleasure, Lord Rand." Huron took the pipe out of his mouth. "That lot in the common room kept trying to pump me, without letting on what they were doing, of course, about who you are, my lord, and why we're in Cairhien. I told them we were waiting here to meet friends, but being Cairhienan, they figured I was hiding something deeper. Let them think what they want. Come on, Loyal."
"I think not," the Ogier sighed. "I really would rather stay here."
He raised a book with a thick finger marking his place.
"I can meet Tom Merrilin some other time."
"Loyal, you can't stay cooped up in here forever. We do not even know how long we'll be in Cairhien. Anyway, we didn't see any Ogier, and if we do, they would not be hunting for you, would they?"
"Not hunting precisely, but Rand, I may have been too hasty in leaving Steading Shangtai the way I did. When I do go home, I may be in a great deal of trouble."
His ears wilted.
"Even if I wait until I'm as old as Elder Hammond, perhaps I could find an abandoned steading to stay in until then."
"If Elder Hammond won't let you come back, you can live in Emmons Field. It's a pretty place. A beautiful place."
"I am sure it is, Rand, but that would never work. You see—"
"We will talk about it when it comes to that, Loyal. Now you are coming to see Tom." The Ogier stood half again as tall as Rand, but Rand pushed him into his long tunic and cloak and down the stairs. When they came pounding through the common room, Rand winked at the innkeeper, then laughed at his startled look. Let him think I'm off to play his bloody great game. Let him think what he wants. Tom's alive. Once through the Jengai Gate in the east wall of the city, everyone seemed to know the Bunch of Grapes. Rand and Loyal quickly found themselves there, on a street that was quiet for the Foregate, with the sun halfway down the afternoon sky. It was an old three-story structure, wooden and rickety, but the common room was clean and full of people. Some men were playing at dice in one corner, and some women at darts in another. Half had the look of Cairhienan, slight and pale, but Rand heard Andoran accents, as well as others he did not know. All wore the clothes of the Foregate, though, a blend of the styles of half a dozen countries. A few looked around when he and Loyal came in, but they all turned back to what they had been doing. The innkeeper was a woman with hair as white as Tom's and sharp eyes that studied Loyal as well as Rand. She was not Cairhienan by her dark skin and her speech. "Tom Merrilin. Aye, he has a room. Top of the stairs, first door on the right. Likely Dina will let you wait for him there." She eyed Rand's red coat with its herons on the high collar and golden brambles embroidered up the sleeves, and his sword. "My lord." The stairs creaked under Rand's boots, let alone Loyal's. Rand was not sure if the building would stand up much longer. He found the door and knocked, wondering who Dina was. "Come in," a woman's voice called. "I cannot open it for you." Rand opened the door hesitantly and put his head in. A big rumpled bed was shoved against one wall, and the rest of the room was all but taken up by a pair of wardrobes, several brass-bound trunks and chests, a table, and 2 wooden chairs. The slender woman, sitting cross-legged on the bed with her skirts tucked under her, was keeping 6 colored balls spinning in a wheel between her hands. "Whatever it is," she said, looking at juggling. "Leave it on the table. Tom will pay you when he comes back." "Are you Dina?" Rand asked. She snatched the balls out of the air and turned to regard him. She was only a handful of years older than he, pretty and with fair Carianian skin, and dark hair hanging loose to her shoulders. I do not know you. This is my room, mine and Tom Maryland's. The innkeeper said you might let us wait here for Tom, Rand said, if you're Dina. Us? Rand moved into the room so Loyal could duck inside, and the young woman's eyebrows lifted. So the Ogier have come back. I am, Dina. What do you want? She looked at Rand's coat so deliberately that the failure to add, my lord, had to be purposeful, though her brows went up again at the herons on his scabbard and sword hilt. Rand hefted the bundle he carried. I've brought Tom back his harp and his flute. I want to visit with him, he added quickly. She seemed on the point of telling him to leave them. I haven't seen him in a long time. She eyed the bundle. Tom always moans about losing the best flute and the best harp he ever had. You would think he was a court bard the way he carries on. Very well. You can wait, but I must practice. Tom says he will let me perform in the halls next week. She rose gracefully and took one of the two chairs, motioning Loyal to sit on the bed. Zara would make Tom pay for 6 chairs if you broke one of these, friend Ogier. Rand gave their names as he sat in the other chair. It creaked alarmingly under even his weight, and asked doubtfully, Are you Tom's apprentice? Dina gave a small smile. You might say that. She had resumed her juggling, and her eyes were on the whirling balls.
I have never heard of a woman gleeman,
Loyal said. I will be the first. The one big circle became 2 smaller overlapping circles. I will see the whole world before I am done. Tom says once we have enough money, we will go down to Tyr. She switched to juggling 3 balls in each hand. And then maybe out to the Sea Folks Islands. The Athan Mier paid gleemen well. Rand eyed the room, with all the chests and trunks. It did not look like the room of someone intending to move on soon. There was even a flower growing in a pot on the windowsill. His gaze fell on the single big bed where Loyal was sitting. This is my room. Mine and Tom Maryland's. Dina gave him a challenging look through the large wheel she had resumed. Rand's face reddened. He cleared his throat. Maybe we ought to wait downstairs, he began when the door opened, and Tom came in with his cloak flapping around his ankles, patches fluttering. Cased flute and harp hung on his back. The cases were reddish wood, polished by handling. Dina made the balls disappear inside her dress and ran to throw her arms around Tom's neck, standing a tiptoe to do it. I missed you, she said, and kissed him. The kiss went on for some time, so long that Rand was beginning to wonder if he and Loyal should leave, but Dina let her heels drop to the floor with a sigh.
Do you know what that lackwit Schoffin's done now, girl?
Tom said, looking down at her.
He's taken on a pack of louts who call themselves players. They walk around pretending to be Rogash Eagle-Eye, and Blaze, and Guidal Kane, and... They hang a scrap of painted canvas behind them, supposed to make the audience believe these fools are in Matuchin Hall, or the high passes in the Mountains of Doom. I make the listener see every banner, smell every battle, feel every emotion. I make them believe they are Guidal Kane. Schoffen will have his hall torn down around his ears if he puts this lot on to follow me.
Tom, we have visitors. Loyal, son of Arendt, son of Holland. Oh, and a boy who calls himself Randall Thor. Tom looked over her head at Rand, frowning.
Leave us for a while, Dina. Here.
He pressed some silver coins into her hand.
Your knives are ready. Why don't you go pay Ivan for them?
He brushed her smooth cheek with a gnarled knuckle.
Go on. I'll make it up to you.
She gave him a dark look, but she tossed her cloak around her shoulders, muttering, Ivan better have the balance right.
She'll be a bard one day, Tom said with a note of pride after she was gone. She listens to a tale once only, mind, and she has it right. Not just the words, but every nuance, every rhythm. She has a fine hand on the harp, and she played the flute better the first time she picked it up than you ever did.
He set the wooden instrument cases atop one of the larger trunks, then dropped into the chair she had abandoned. When I passed through Camelin on the way here, Balzogil told me you'd left in the company with an Ogier, among others. He bowed toward Loyal, even managing a flourish of his cloak despite the fact that he was sitting on it. I am pleased to meet you, Loyal, son of Arendt, son of Hallen.
And I too meet you, Tom Merrilin.
Loyal stood to make his bow in return. When he straightened, his head almost brushed the ceiling, and he quickly sat down again.
The young woman said she wants to be a gleeman.
Tom's headshake was disparaging. That's no life for a woman. Not much of a life for a man, for that. Wandering from town to town, village to village, wondering how they'll try to cheat you this time, half the time wondering where your next meal is coming from. No, I'll talk her around. She'll be court-barred to a king or a queen before she's done. Ah, you didn't come here to talk about Dina. My instruments, boy. You brought them? Rand pushed the bundle across the table. Tom undid it hurriedly. He blinked when he saw it was his old cloak, all covered with colorful patches like the one he wore, and opened the hard leather flute case, nodding at the sight of the gold and silver flute nestled inside. I earned my bed and meals with that after we parted, Rand said. I know, the Gleeman replied dryly. I stopped at some of the same inns, but I had to make do with juggling and a few simple stories since you had my... You didn't touch the harp. He pulled open the other dark leather case and took out a gold and silver harp as ornate as the flute, cradling it in his hands like a baby. Your clumsy sheepherder's fingers were never meant for the harp. I didn't touch it, Rand assured him. Tom plucked 2 strings, wincing. At least you could have kept it in tune, he muttered. Rand leaned across the table toward him. Tom, you wanted to go to Ilion to see the great hunt set out, and be one of the first to make new stories about it, but you couldn't. What would you say if I told you you could still be a part of it? A big part. Loyal stirred uneasily.
Rand, are you sure?
Rand waved him to silence, his eyes on Tom. Tom glanced at the Ogier and frowned.
That would depend on what part and how. If you've reason to believe one of the hunters is coming this way, I suppose they could have left Ilion already, but he'd be weeks reaching here if he rode straight on, and why would he? Is this one of the fellows who never went to Ilion? He'll never make it into the stories without the blessing, whatever he does.
It doesn't matter if the hunt has left Ilion or not. Rand heard Loyal's breath catch. Tom, we have the Horn of Valere. For a moment, there was dead silence. Tom broke it with a great guffaw of laughter. You too have the horn. A shepherd and a beardless Ogier have the horn of... He doubled over, pounding his knee.
The Horn of Valere. But we do have it,
Loyal said seriously. Tom drew a deep breath. Small aftershocks of laughter still seemed to catch him unaware.
I don't know what you frowned, but I can take you to 10 taverns where a fellow will tell you that he knows a man who knows the man who's already found the horn, and he will tell you how it was found, too, as long as you buy his ale. I can take you to 3 men who will sell you the horn and swear their souls under the light it's the real one and true. There is even a lord in the city has what he claims is the horn locked up inside his manor. He says it's a treasure handed down in his house since the breaking. I don't know if the hunters will ever find the horn, but they will hunt down 10,000 lies along the way. Moraine says it's the horn, Rand said. Tom's mirth was cut short. She does she? I thought you said she was not with you. She isn't, Tom. I have not seen her since I left Valdara in Shinar, and for a month before that, she said no more than 2 words together to me. He could not keep the bitterness out of his voice. And when she did talk, I wished she'd kept on ignoring me. I'll never dance to her tune again. The light burned her and every other Aes Sedai. No, not Egwene, not Nynaeve. He was conscious of Tom watching him closely. She isn't here, Tom. I do not know where she is, and I don't care.
Well, at least you have sense enough to keep it secret. If you hadn't, it would be all over the Foregate by now, and half of Kyrian would be lying in wait to take it away. Half the world.
Well, we've kept it secret, Tom. And I have to bring it back to Faldara without Dark Friends or anyone else taking it away. That's story enough for you right there, isn't it? I could be the friend who knows the world. You know things I can't even imagine. Loyal and Huron know more than I do, but we're all three floundering in deep water.
Huron? No, don't tell me how. I do not want to know.
The Gleeman pushed back his chair and went to stare out of the window.
The Horn of Valir. That means the last battle is coming. Who will notice? Did you see the people laughing in the streets out there? Let the grain barges stop a week, and they won't laugh. Galdrian will think they've all become Aiel. The nobles all play the game of houses, scheming to get close to the king, scheming to gain more power than the king, scheming to pull down and be the next king or queen. They will think Tom and Gaydon is only a ploy in the game.
He turned away from the window.
I don't suppose you are talking about simply riding to Shinar and handing the horn to who? The king? Why Shinar? The legends all tie the horn to Ilion.
Rand looked at Loyal. The Ogier's ears were sagging. Shinar, because I know who to give it to there. And there are Trollocs and Dark Friends after us.
Why does that not surprise me?
No.
I may be an old fool, but I will be an old fool in my own way. You take the glory, boy.
Tom,
no.
There was a silence, broken only by the creaking of the bed as Loyal shifted. Finally, Rand said, Loyal, would you mind leaving Tom and me alone for a bit, please? Loyal looked surprised. The tufts on his ears went almost to points. But he nodded and rose.
That dice game in the common room looked interesting. Perhaps they will let me play.
Tom eyed Rand suspiciously as the door closed behind the Ogier. Rand hesitated. There were things he needed to know, things he was sure Tom knew. The Gleeman had once seemed to know a great deal about a surprising number of things, but he was not sure how to ask. Tom, he said at last, are there any books that have the Kariathon cycle in them? Easier to call it that than the prophecies of God.
The great libraries, Tom said slowly, and in translations, and even in the old tongue, here and there.
Rand started to ask if there was any way for him to find one, but the Gleeman went on.
Hey,
The old tongue has music in it too.
Galaxy
But
NBA, how
too
you
many,
doing?
even of the nobles, are impatient with listening to it these days. Nobles are all expected to know the old tongue, but many only learn enough to impress people who don't. Translations don't have the same sound unless they're in high chant, and sometimes that changes meanings even more than most translations.
Did I take what? Cows?
There is one verse in the
I have
cycle
no idea what that is, dude,
scan
so
well,
probably not.
translated word for word, but there's no meaning lost. It goes like this. Twice and twice shall he be marked, twice to live and twice to die. Once the heron to set his path, twice the heron to name
Let me
him
ring
true.
your bell, though.
Once the dragon for remembrance lost, twice the dragon for the price he must pay.
He reached out and touched the herons embroidered on Rand's high collar. For a moment, Rand could only gape at him, and when he could speak, his voice was unsteady. The sword makes 5. Hilt, scabbard, and blade. He turned his hand down on the table, hiding the brand on his palm. For the first time since Celine's salve had done its work, he could feel it. Not hurting, but he knew it was there.
So they do.
Tom barked a laugh.
There's another comes to mind. Twice dawns the day when his blood is shed. Once for mourning, once for birth. Red on black, the dragon's blood stains the rock of Sheol Gul. In the pit of doom shall his blood free men from the shadow.
Rand shook his head, denying, but Tom seemed not to notice.
I don't see how a day can dawn twice, but then a lot of it doesn't really make much sense. The Stone of Tyr will never fall till Kalandor is wielded by the Dragon Reborn, but the sword that cannot be touched lies in the heart of the stone. So how can he wield it first, eh? Well, be that as it may, I suspect Aes Sedai will want to
But
make
how are you
events fit the
doing,
prophecies as closely as they can.
Universe
Dying somewhere
Galaxy?
in the blasted lands would be a high price to pay for going along with them. It was an effort for Rand to make his voice calm, but he did it. No Aes Sedai are using me for anything. I told you the last I saw of Moraine was in Shinar. She said I could go where I wanted, and I left. Now there's no Aes Sedai with you now? None at all? None. Tom knuckled his dangling white mustaches. He seemed satisfied and at the same time puzzled. Then why ask about the prophecies? Why send the Ogier out of the room? I didn't want to upset him. He's nervous enough about the horn. That's what I wanted to ask. Is the horn mentioned in the prophecies? He still could not make himself say it all the way out. All these false dragons, and now the horn is found. Everybody thinks the Horn of Valir is supposed to summon dead heroes to fight the Dark One in the last battle, and the Dragon Reborn is supposed to fight the Dark One in the last battle. It seemed natural enough to ask.
I suppose it is. Not many know that about the Dragon Reborn fighting the last battle, or if they do, they think he'll fight alongside the Dark One. Not many read the prophecies to find out. What was that you said about the horn? Supposed to.
I've learned a few things since we parted, Tom. They will come for whoever blows the horn, even a dark friend. Bushy eyebrows rose nearly to Tom's hairline.
Now that I didn't know. You have learned a few things.
It doesn't mean I would let the White Tower use me for a false dragon. I don't want anything to do with Aes Sedai, or false dragons, or the power, or... Rand bit his tongue. Get mad, and you start babbling. Fool.
For a time, I thought you were the one Moraine wanted. And I even thought I knew why. You know, no man chooses to channel the power. It is something that happens to him like a disease. You cannot blame a man for falling sick, even if it might kill you, too.
Your nephew could channel, couldn't he? You told me that was why you helped us, because your nephew had had trouble with the White Tower, and there was nobody to help him. There's only one kind of trouble men can have with Aes Sedai. Tom stood pursing his lips.
I don't suppose there is any use in denying it.
Hey,
You
Christopher,
understand,
how
it is
you
not the
doing?
kind of thing a man talks
you're
about,
doing well.
having a male relative who could channel. Ah,
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
the Red Ajah never gave Owen a chance. They gentled him and then he died.
I'm smoking a little
He
bit of
just
my
gave up wanting to live.
cart.
He exhaled sadly.
Well, that and my bowl.
Rand
So
shivered.
it's
Why didn't Moraine do that
in
to me?
between.
A chance, Tom. Do you mean there was some way he could have dealt with it? Not gone mad? Not died?
Owen held it off almost 3 years. He never hurt anyone. He didn't use the power unless he had to, and then only to help his village.
Tom threw up his hands.
I suppose there was no choice. The people where he lived told me he was acting strange that whole last year. They did not much want to talk about it, and they nearly stoned me when they found out I was his uncle. I suppose he was going mad. But he was my blood boy. I can't love the Aes Sedai for what they did to him, even if they had to. If Moraine's let you go, then you are well out of it.
For a moment, Rand was silent. Fool. Of course there's no way to deal with it. You're going to go mad and die whatever you do. But Ba'alzamon said, no.
Nice,
He colored under
Christopher.
Tom's scrutiny. I mean, I am out of it, Tom. But I still have the Horn of Valir. Think of it, Tom. The Horn of Valir. Other Gleemen might tell tales about it, but you could say you had it in your hands. He realized he sounded like Selene, but all that did was make him wonder where she was.
There's nobody I'd rather have with us than you, Tom.
Tom frowned as if considering it. But in the end, he shook his head firmly. Boy, I like you well enough. But you know as well as I do that I only helped before because there was an Aes Sedai mixed in it. Coffin doesn't try to cheat me more than I expect, and with the king's gift added in, I could never earn as much in the villages. To my very great surprise, Dina seems to love me, and as much a surprise, I return the feeling. Now why should I leave that to go be chased by Trollocs and dark friends? The Horn of Valir? Oh, it is a temptation, I'll admit. But no. No. I will not get mixed up in it again. He leaned over to pick up one of the wooden instrument cases, long and narrow. When he opened it, a flute lay inside, plainly made, but mounted with silver. He closed it again and slid it across the table. You might need to earn your supper again someday, boy.
I might at that, Rand said. At least we can talk. I will be in... The Gleeman was shaking his head.
A clean break is best, boy. If you're always coming around, even if you never mention it, I won't be able to get the horn out of my head. And I won't be tangled in it. I won't.
After Rand left, Tom threw his cloak on the bed and sat with his elbows on the table. The Horn of Valir. How did that farm boy find it? He shut off that line of thought. Think about the horn too long, and he would find himself running off with Rand to carry it to Shinar. That would make a story, carrying the Horn of Valir to the borderlands with Trollocs and dark friends pursuing. Scowling, he reminded himself of Dina. Even if she had not loved him, talent such as hers was not to be found every day. And she did love, even if he could not begin to imagine why. Oh, fool, he muttered. Aye, an old fool, Zara said from the door. He gave a start. He had been so absorbed in his thoughts that he had not heard the door open. He had known Zara for years, off and on in his wanderings, and she always took full advantage of the friendship to speak her mind. An old fool who's playing the game of houses again. Unless my ears are failing, that young lord has the sound of Andor on his tongue. He's no Carrienan, that's for certain sure. Deus Demar is dangerous enough without letting an outland lord mix you in his schemes. Tom blinked.
Hell yeah,
and considered the way
Christopher.
Rand
That's always good.
That coat had surely been fine enough for a lord. He was growing old, letting things like that slip by him. Ruefully, he realized he was considering whether to tell Zara the truth or let her continue thinking as she did. All it takes is to think about the great game, and I start playing it.
The boy is a shepherd, Zara, from the Two Rivers.
She laughed scornfully. And I'm the Queen of Gillidan. I tell you, the game has grown dangerous in Caria in the last few years. Nothing like what you knew in Caemlyn. There are murders done now. You'll have your throat cut for you if you don't watch out.
I tell you, I am not in the great game any longer. That's all 20 years in the past, near enough.
Aye. She did not sound as if she believed it. But be that as it may, and young outland lords aside, you've begun performing at the Lord's Manors. They pay well. And they'll pull you into their plots as soon as they see how. They see a man and think how to use him as naturally as breathing. This young lord of yours won't help you. They will eat him alive. He gave up on trying to convince her. He was out of it.
Is that what you came up to say, Zara?
Aye. Forget playing the great game, Tom. Marry Dina. She'll take you, the more fool her, bony and white-haired as you are. Marry her and forget this young lord and Deus Demar. I thank you for the advice, he said dryly. Marry her? Burden her with an old husband? She'll never be a bard with my past hanging around her neck.
If you don't mind, Zara, I want to be alone for a while. I perform for Lady Arlen and her guests tonight, and I need to prepare.
She gave him a snort and a shake of her head and banged the door shut behind her. Tom drummed his fingers on the
Trying to
table.
find something to put on the TV.
Coat or no coat, Rand was
Even
still
though I'm
only a
not
shepherd.
listening to it, but
If he had been more,
If he had
Still
been
gotta
what
find the
Tom
right
once
one.
suspected, a man who could channel, neither Moraine nor any other Aes Sedai would ever have let him walk away ungentled. Horn or no horn, the boy was only a shepherd. He is out of it, he said aloud. And so am I. Chapter 27. The Shadow in the Night.
I do not understand it, Loyal said. I was winning most of the time, and then Dina came in and joined the game, and she won it all right back. Every toss. She called it a little lesson. What did she mean by that?
Rand and the Ogier were making their way through the foregate, the bunch of grapes behind them. The sun sat low in the west, a red ball half below the horizon, throwing long shadows behind them. The street was empty, save for one of the big puppets, a goat-horned Trolloc with a sword at its belt, coming toward them with 5 men working the poles. But sounds of merriment drifted still from other parts of the foregate, where the halls of entertainment and the taverns stood. Here, doors were already barred and windows shuttered. Rand stopped fingering the wooden flute case and slung it on his back. I suppose I couldn't expect him to throw over everything and come with me. But at least he could talk to me. Light, I wish Ingtar would show up. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and felt Celine's note.
You don't suppose she...
Loyal paused uncomfortably.
You don't suppose she cheated, do you? Everybody was grinning as if she were doing something clever.
Rand shrugged at his cloak. I have to take the horn and go. If we wait for Ingtar, anything can happen. Pain will come sooner or later. I have to stay ahead of him. The men with the puppet were almost to them.
Rand,
Loyal said suddenly.
I don't think that's a...
Abruptly, the men let their poles clatter to the packed dirt street. Instead of collapsing, the Trolloc leaped for Rand with outstretched hands. There was no time to think. Instinct brought the sword out of its sheath in a flashing arc. The moon rises over the lakes. The Trolloc staggered back with a bubbling cry, snarling even as it fell. For an instant, everyone stood frozen. Then the men, the dark friends they had to be, looked from the Trolloc lying in the street to Rand with the sword in his hands and Loyal at his side. They turned and ran. Rand was close to the Trolloc too. The void had surrounded him before his hand touched hilt. Saidin shone in his mind, beckoning, sickening. With an effort, he made the void vanish and licked his lips. Without the emptiness, fear crawled on his skin. Loyal, we have to get back to the inn. Euron's alone and they... He grunted as he was lifted into the air by a thick arm, long enough to pin both of his to his chest. A hairy hand grabbed his throat. He caught sight of a tusked snout just over his head. A rank smell filled his nose, equal parts sour sweat and pigsty. As quickly as it had seized him, the hand at his throat was torn away. Stunned, Rand stared at the thick Ogier fingers clutching the Trolloc's wrist.
Hold on, Rand.
Loyal's voice sounded strained. The Ogier's other hand came around and took hold of the arm still holding Rand above the ground.
Hold on.
Rand was shaken from side to side as Ogier and Trolloc struggled. Abruptly, he fell free. Staggering, he took 2 steps to get clear and turned back with sword raised. Standing behind the boar-snouted Trolloc, Loyal had it by wrist and forearm, holding its arms spread wide, breathing hard with the effort. The Trolloc snarled gutturally in the harsh Trolloc tongue, throwing its head back in efforts to catch Loyal with the tusk. Their boots scuffled across the dirt of the street. Rand tried to find a place to put his blade in the Trolloc without hurting Loyal, but Ogier and Trolloc spun in their rough dance so much that he could find no opening. With a grunt, the Trolloc pulled its left arm free, but before it could loose itself completely, Loyal snapped his own arm around its neck, hugging the creature close. The Trolloc clawed at its sword. The scythe-like blade hung on the wrong side for left-handed use, but inch by inch the dark steel began sliding out of the scabbard. And still they thrashed about so that Rand could not strike without risking Loyal. Power. That could do it. How, he did not know, but he knew nothing else to try. The Trolloc had its sword half unsheathed. When the curved blade was bare, it would kill Loyal. Reluctantly, he formed the void. Saidin shone at him, pulled at him. Dimly, he seemed to recall a time when it had sung to him, but now it only drew him. A flower's perfume drawing a bee, a midden's stench drawing a fly. He opened himself up, reached for it. There was nothing there. He could as well have been reaching for light and truth. The taint slid off onto him, soiling him, but there was no flow of light inside him. Driven by a distant desperation, he tried again and again. And again and again there was only the taint. With a sudden heave, Loyal threw the Trolloc aside, so hard that the thing cartwheeled against the side of a building. It struck head first with a loud crack and slid down the wall to lie with its neck twisted at an impossible angle. Loyal stood staring at it, his chest heaving. Rand looked out of the emptiness for a moment before he realized what had happened. As soon as he did, though, he let void and tainted light go and hurried to Loyal's side.
I never killed before, Rand.
Loyal drew a shuddering breath. It would have killed you if you hadn't, Rand told him. Anxiously, he looked at the alleys and shuttered windows and barred doors. Where there were 2 Trollocs, there had to be more. I'm sorry you had to do it, Loyal, but it would have killed both of us, or worse.
I know, but I cannot like it. Even a Trolloc.
Pointing toward the setting sun, the Ogier seized Rand's arm.
There's another of them.
Against the sun, Rand could not make out details, but it appeared to be another group of men with a huge puppet coming toward Loyal and him. Except that now he knew what to look for. The puppet moved its legs too naturally, and the snouted head rose to sniff the air without anyone lifting a pole. He did not think the Trolloc and Dark Friends could see him among the evening shadows, or what lay in the street around him. They moved too slowly for that. Yet it was plain they were hunting, and coming closer. Thane knows I am out here somewhere, he said, hastily wiping his blade on a dead Trolloc's coat. He sent them to find me. He is afraid of the Trollocs being seen, though, or he wouldn't have them disguised. If we can reach a street where there are people, we'll be safe. We have to get back to Huron. If Thane finds him, alone with the horn... He pulled Loyal along to the next corner and turned toward the nearest sounds of laughter and music. But long before they reached it, another group of men appeared ahead of them in the otherwise empty street with a puppet that was no puppet. Rand and Loyal took the next turning. It led east. Every time Rand tried to reach the music and laughter, there was a Trolloc in the way, often sniffing the air for a scent. Some Trollocs hunted by scent. Sometimes, here where there were no eyes to see, a Trolloc stalked alone. More than once he was sure it was one he had seen before. They were closing in and making sure he and Loyal did not leave the deserted streets with their shuttered windows. Slowly the 2 of them were forced east, away from the city and Huron, away from other people, along narrow, slowly darkening streets that ran in all directions, uphill and down. Rand eyed the houses they passed, the tall buildings closed up tight for the night, with more than a little regret. Even if he pounded on a door until someone opened it, even if they took Loyal and him in, none of the doors he saw would stop a Trolloc. All that would do would be to offer up more victims with Loyal and himself.
Rand,
Loyal said finally.
there is nowhere else to go.
They had reached the eastern edge of the foregate. The tall buildings to either side of them were the last. Lights in windows on the upper stories mocked him, but the lower floors were all shut tight. Ahead lay the hills, cloaked in first twilight and bare of so much as a farmhouse. Not entirely empty, though. He could just make out pale walls surrounding one of the larger hills, perhaps a mile away, and buildings inside.
Once they push us out there,
Loyal said.
they won't have to worry who sees them.
Rand gestured to the walls around the hill. Those should stop a Trolloc. It must be a lord's manor. Maybe they'll let us in. An Ogier and an outland lord? This coat has to be good for something sooner or later. He looked back down the street. No Trollocs in sight yet, but he drew Loyal around the side of the building anyway.
I think that is the Illuminator's chapter house, Rand. Illuminators guard their secrets tightly. I don't think they would let Galdrian himself inside there.
"What trouble have you gotten yourself into now?" said a familiar woman's voice. There was suddenly a spicy perfume in the air. Rand stared. Celine stepped around the corner they had just rounded, her white dress bright in the dimness. "How did you get here? What are you doing here? You have to leave immediately. Run! There are Trollocs after us." "So I saw." Her voice was dry, yet cool and composed. "I came to find you, and I find you allowing Trollocs to herd you like sheep. Can the man who possesses the Horn of Valdir let himself be treated so?" "I don't have it with me," he snapped, "and I don't know how it could help if I did. The dead heroes are not supposed to come back to save me from Trollocs. Celine, you have to get away, now." He peered around the corner. Not more than 100 paces away, a Trolloc was sticking its horned head cautiously into the street, smelling the night. A large shadow by its side had to be another Trolloc, and there were smaller shadows too. Dark friends. "Too late," Rand muttered. He shifted the flute case to pull off his cloak and wrap it around her. It was long enough to hide her white dress entirely and trail on the ground besides. "You'll have to hold that up to run," he told her. "Loyal, if they won't let us in, we'll have to find a way to sneak in."
But Rand,
"Would you rather wait for the Trollocs?" He gave Loyal a push to start him and took Celine's hand to follow at a trot. "Find us a path that won't break our necks, Loyal." "You're letting yourself become flustered," Celine said. She seemed to be having less trouble following Loyal in the failing light than Rand did. "Seek the oneness and be calm. One who would be great must always be calm." "The Trollocs might hear you," he told her. "I don't want greatness." He thought he heard an irritated grunt from her. Stones sometimes turned underfoot, but the way across the hills was not hard despite the twilight shadows. Trees and even brush had long since been cleared from the hills for firewood. Nothing grew except knee-high grass that rustled softly around their legs. A night breeze came up softly. Rand worried that it might carry their scent to the Trollocs. Loyal stopped when they reached the wall. It stood twice as high as the Ogier, the stones covered with a whitish plaster. Rand peered back toward the foregate. Bands of lighted windows reached out like spokes of a wheel from the city walls. "Loyal," he said softly, "can you see them? Are they following us?" The Ogier looked in the direction of the foregate and nodded unhappily.
"I only see some of the Trollocs, but they are coming this way. Running. Rand, I really don't think—"
Celine cut him off. "If he wants to go in, Alantin, he needs a door, such as that one." She pointed to a dark patch a little down the wall. Even with her telling him, Rand was not certain it was a door, but when she strode to it and pulled, it opened.
"Rand,"
Loyal began. Rand pushed him to the door. "Later, Loyal, and softly. We're hiding, remember?" He got them inside and closed the door behind them. There were brackets for a bar, but no bar to be seen. It would not stop anyone, but maybe the Trollocs would hesitate to come inside the walls. They were in an alleyway leading up the hill between two long, low, windowless buildings. At first he thought they were stone too, but then he realized the white plaster had been laid over wood. It was dark enough now for the moon reflecting from the walls to give a semblance of light. "Better to be arrested by the Illuminators than taken by Trollocs," he murmured, starting up the hill.
"But that is what I was trying to tell you,"
Loyal protested.
"I've heard the Illuminators kill intruders. They keep their secrets hard and fast, Rand."
Rand stopped dead and stared back at the door. The Trollocs were still out there. At the worst, humans had to be better to deal with than Trollocs. He might be able to talk the Illuminators into letting them go. Trollocs did not listen before they killed. "I'm sorry I got you into this, Celine." "Danger adds a certain something," she said softly. "And so far you handle it well. Shall we see what we find?" She brushed past him up the alleyway. Rand followed, the spicy smell of her filling his nostrils. Atop the hill, the alleyway opened onto a wide expanse of smoothly flattened clay, almost as pale as the plaster, and nearly surrounded by more white windowless buildings, with the shadows of narrow alleys between. But to Rand's right stood one building with windows, light falling onto the pale clay. He pulled back into the shadows of the alley as a man and a woman appeared, walking slowly across the open space. Their clothes were certainly not Cairienin. The man wore breeches as baggy as his shirt sleeves, both in a soft yellow, with embroidery on the legs of his breeches and across the chest of his shirt. The woman's dress, worked elaborately across the breast, seemed pale green, and her hair was done in a multitude of short braids. "All is in readiness, you say?" the woman demanded. "You are certain, Tammuz? All?" The man spread his hands. "Always should check behind me, Aludra. All is in readiness. The display, it could be given this very moment. The gates and doors, they are all barred. All of the..." Her voice faded as they moved on to the far end of the lighted building. Rand studied the open area, recognizing almost nothing. In the middle of it, several dozen upright tubes, each nearly as tall as he and a foot or more across, sat on large wooden bases. From each tube, a dark, twisted cord ran across the ground and behind a low wall, perhaps 3 paces long, on the far side. All around the open space stood a welter of wooden racks with troughs and tubes and forked sticks and a score of other things. All the fireworks he had ever seen could be held in one hand, and that was as much as he knew, except that they burst with a great roar or whizzed along the ground in spirals of sparks, or sometimes shot into the air. They always came with warnings from the illuminators that opening one could cause it to go off. In any case, fireworks were too expensive for the village council to have allowed anybody unskilled to open one. He could well remember the time when Matt had tried to do just that. It was nearly a week before anyone but Matt's own mother would speak to him. The only thing that Rand found familiar at all was the cords, the fuses. That, he knew, was where you set the fire. With a glance back at the unbarred door, he motioned the others to follow and started around the tubes. If they were going to find a place to hide, he wanted to be as far from the door as he could. It meant making their way between the racks, and Rand held his breath every time he brushed against one. The things in them shifted with the slightest touch, rattling. All of them seemed to be made of wood without a piece of metal. He could imagine a racket if one were knocked over. He eyed the tall tubes warily, remembering the bang made by one the size of his finger. If those were fireworks, he did not want to be this close to them. Loyal muttered to himself continually, especially when he bumped one of the racks, then started back so fast he bumped another. The Ogier crept along in a cloud of clatters and muttering. Selene was no less unnerving. She strode as casually as if they were on a city street. She did not bump anything, did not make a sound, but she also made no effort to keep the cloak closed. The white of her dress seemed brighter than all the walls together. He peered at the lighted windows, waiting for someone to appear. All it would take was one. Selene could not fail to be seen, the alarm given. The windows remained empty, though. Rand was just breathing a sigh of relief as they approached the low wall, and the alleys and buildings behind it, when Loyal brushed against another rack, standing right beside the wall. It held 10 soft-looking sticks, as long as Rand's arm, with thin streams of smoke rising from their tips. The rack made hardly a sound when it fell, the smoldering sticks sprawling across one of the fuses. With a crackling hiss, the fuse burst into flame, and the flame raced toward one of the tall tubes. Rand goggled for an instant, then he tried to whisper a shout. "Behind the wall!" Selene made an angry noise when he bore her to the ground behind the wall, but he did not care. He tried to spread himself over her protectively as Loyal crowded beside them. Waiting for the tube to burst, he wondered if there would be anything left of the wall. There was a hollow thump that he felt through the ground as much as heard. Cautiously, he lifted himself off of Selene enough to peer around the edge of the wall. She fisted him in the ribs hard and wriggled out from under him, with an oath in a language he did not recognize. But he was beyond noticing. A trickle of smoke was leaking from the top of one of the tubes. That was all. He shook his head wonderingly. If that's all there is to it. With a crash like thunder, a huge flower of red and white bloomed high in the now dark sky, then slowly began drifting away in sparkles. As he goggled at it, the lighted building erupted with noise. Shouting men and women filled the windows, staring and pointing. Rand longingly eyed the dark alleyway, only a dozen steps away, and the first step would be in full view of the people at the windows. Pounding feet poured from the building. He pressed Loyal and Celine back against the wall, hoping they looked like just another shadow. "Be still and be silent," he whispered. "It's our only hope." "Sometimes," Celine said quietly, "if you are very still, no one can see you at all." She did not sound the least bit worried. Boots thumped back and forth on the other side of the wall, and voices were raised in anger, especially the one Rand recognized as Aludra. "You great buffoon, Tammuz! You great pig, you! Your mother, she was a goat, Tammuz. One day you will kill us all." "I am not to blame for this, Aludra," the man protested. "I have been sure to put everything where it belonged, and the punks, they were—" "You will not speak to me, Tammuz. A great pig does not deserve to speak like a human." Aludra's voice changed in answer to another man's question. "There is no time to prepare another. Galdrian, you must be satisfied with the rest for tonight. And one early. And you, Tammuz, you will set everything right, and tomorrow you will leave with the carts to buy the manure. Does anything else go wrong this night? I will not trust you again, even with so much as the manure." Footsteps faded back toward the building to the accompaniment of Aludra's muttering. Tammuz remained growling under his breath about the unfairness of it all. Rand stopped breathing as the man came over to right the toppled stand. Pressed back in the shadows against the wall, he could see Tammuz's back and shoulder. All the man had to do was turn his head, and he could not miss seeing Rand and the others. Still complaining to himself, Tammuz arranged the smoldering sticks in the stand, then stalked off toward the building where everyone else had gone. Letting his breath go, Rand took a quick look after the man, then pulled back into the shadows. A few people still stood at the windows. "We can't expect any more luck tonight," he whispered. "It is said great men make their own luck," Celine said softly. "Will you stop that?" he told her wearily. He wished the smell of her did not fill his head so. It made it hard to think clearly. He could remember the feel of her body when he pushed her down. Softness and firmness in a disturbing blend. And that did not help either.
Rand,
Loyal was peering around the end of the wall, away from the lighted building.
I think we need some more luck, Rand.
Rand shifted to look over the Ogier's shoulder. Beyond open space, in the alleyway that led to the barless door, 3 Trollocs were peering cautiously out of the shadows toward the lighted windows. One woman was standing at a window. She did not seem to see the Trollocs. "So," Celine said quietly, "it becomes a trap. These people may kill you if they take you. The Trollocs surely will. But perhaps you can slay the Trollocs too quickly for them to make any outcry. Perhaps you can stop the people from killing you to preserve their little secrets. You may not want greatness, but it will take a great man to do these things." "You don't have to sound happy about it," Rand said. He tried to stop thinking about how she smelled, how she felt, and the void almost surrounded him. He shook it away. The Trollocs did not seem to have located them yet. He settled back, staring at the nearest dark alleyway. Once they made a move toward it, the Trollocs would surely see, and so would the woman at the window. It would be a race as to whether Trollocs or Illuminators reached them first. "Your greatness will make me happy." Despite the words, Celine sounded angry. "Perhaps I should leave you to find your own way for a time. If you'll not take greatness when it is in your grasp, perhaps you deserve to die." Rand refused to look at her. "Loyal, can you see if there's another door down that alley?" The Ogier shook his head.
There is too much light here and too much dark there. If I were in the alley, yes.
Rand fingered the hilt of his sword. "Take Celine. As soon as you see a door, if you do, call out, and I'll follow. If there isn't a door at the end,
You will have to lift her so she can reach the top of the wall and climb over.
All right, Rand.
Loyal sounded worried.
But when we move, those Trollocs will come after us no matter who is watching. Even if there is a door, they will be on our heels.
You let me worry about the Trollocs. 3 of them. I might do it with the Void. The thought of Saidin decided him. Too many strange things had happened when he let the male half of the true source come close. I will follow as soon as I can. Go. He turned to peer around the wall at the Trollocs. From the corner of his eye, he had an impression of Loyal's bulk moving, of Celine's white dress half covered by his cloak. One of the Trollocs beyond the tubes pointed to them excitedly. But still the 3 hesitated, glancing up at the window where the woman still watched. 3 of them. There has to be a way. Not the Void. Not Saidin.
There is a door,
came Loyal's soft call. One of the Trollocs took a step out of the shadows, and the others followed, gathering themselves. As from a distance, Rand heard the woman at the window cry out, and Loyal shouted something. Without thinking, Rand was on his feet. He had to stop the Trollocs somehow, or they would run him down, and Loyal and Celine. He snatched one of the smoldering sticks and hurled himself at the nearest tube. It tilted, starting to fall over, and he caught the square wooden base. The tube pointed straight at the Trollocs. They slowed uncertainly. The woman at the window screamed, and Rand touched the smoking end of the stick to the fuse, right where it joined the tube. The hollow thump came immediately, and the thick wooden base slammed against him, knocking him down. A roar like a thunderclap broke the night, and a blinding burst of light tore away the dark. Blinking, Rand staggered to his feet, coughing in thick, acrid smoke, ears ringing. He stared in amazement. Half the tubes and all of the racks lay on their sides, and one corner of the building beside which the Trollocs had stood was simply gone, flames licking at the ends of planks and rafters. Of the Trollocs, there was no sign. Through the ringing in his ears, Rand heard shouts from the illuminators in the building. He broke into a tottering run, lumbered into the alley. Halfway down it, he stumbled over something and realized it was his cloak. He snatched it up without pausing. Behind him, the cries of the illuminators filled the night. Loyal was bouncing impatiently on his feet beside the open door, and he was alone. "Where is Celine?" Rand demanded.
She went back, Rand. I tried to grab her, and she slipped right out of my hands.
Rand turned back toward the noise. Through the incessant sound in his ears, some of the shouts were barely distinguishable. There was light there now, from the flames. "The sand buckets! Fetch the sand buckets quickly! This is disaster! Disaster! Some of them went that way!" Loyal grabbed Rand's shoulder.
You cannot help her, Rand. Not by being taken yourself. We must go.
Someone appeared at the end of the alley, a shadow outlined by the glow of flames behind, and pointed toward them.
Come on, Rand.
Rand let himself be pulled out of the door into the darkness. The fire faded behind them until it was only a glow in the night, and the lights of the foregate came closer. Rand almost wished more Trollocs would appear, something he could fight. But there was only the night breeze ruffling the grass.
I tried to stop her,
Loyal said. There was a long silence.
We really couldn't have done anything. They would just have taken us, too.
Rand sighed. I know, Loyal. You did what you could. He walked backwards a few steps, staring at the glow. It seemed less. The illuminators must be putting out the flames. I have to help her somehow. How? Saidin? The power? He shivered. I have to. They went through the foregate by the lighted streets, wrapped in a silence that shut out the gaiety around them. When they entered the defender of the Dragon Wall, the innkeeper held out his tray with a sealed parchment. Rand took it and stared at the white seal, a crescent moon and stars. Who left this? When? An old woman, my lord. Not a quarter of an hour gone. A servant, though she did not say from what house. Quayle smiled, as if inviting confidences. Thank you, Rand said. The innkeeper watched them go upstairs with a thoughtful look.
Huron took his pipe out of his mouth when Rand and Loyal entered the room. Huron had his short sword and swordbreaker on the table, wiping them with an oily rag. You were along with the Gleeman, my lord. Is he well? Rand gave a start. What? Tom? Yes, he's... He broke open the seal with his thumb and read. When I think I know what you are going to do, you do something else. You are a dangerous man. Perhaps it will not be long before we are together again. Think of the horn. Think of the glory. And think of me, for you are always mine. Again, it bore no signature, but the flowing hand itself. Are all women crazy? Rand demanded of the ceiling. Huron shrugged. Rand threw himself into the other chair, the one sized for an ogier. His feet dangled above the floor, but he did not care. He stared at the blanket-covered chest under the edge of Loyal's bed. Think of the glory. I wish Ingtar would come. Chapter 28. A New Thread in the Pattern. Perrin watched the mountains of Kinslayer's Dagger uncomfortably as he rode. The way still slanted upwards and looked as if it would climb forever, though he thought the crest of the pass must not be too much further. To one side of the trail, the land sloped sharply down into a shallow mountain stream, dashing itself to froth over sharp rocks. To the other side, the mountains reared in a series of jagged cliffs, like frozen stone waterfalls. The trail itself ran through fields of boulders, some the size of a man's head, and some as big as a cart. It would take no great skill to hide in that. The wolves said there were people in the mountains. Perrin wondered if they were some of Fane's dark friends. The wolves did not know or care. They only knew the Twisted Ones were somewhere ahead. Still far ahead, though Ingtar had pressed the column hard. Perrin noticed that Una was watching the mountains around them much the way he himself was. Matt, his bow slung across his back, rode with seeming unconcern, juggling 3 colored balls, yet he looked paler than he had. Perrin examined him 2 and 3 times a day now, frowning, and Perrin was sure she had even tried healing at least once, but it made no difference Perrin could see. In any case, she seemed to be more absorbed in something about which she did not speak. Rand, Perrin thought, looking at the Aes Sedai's back. She always rode at the head of the column with Ingtar, and she always wanted them to move even faster than the Shienaran Lord would allow. Somehow she knows about Rand. Images from the wolves flickered in his head. Stone farmhouses and terraced villages, all beyond the mountain peaks. The wolves saw them no differently than they saw hills or meadows, except for the feeling that they were spoiled land. For a moment, he found himself sharing that regret,
for yesterday,
remembering
I had to
places
get up,
the 2 legs had long since abandoned,
earlier than I usually
remembering
do.
the swift rush through the trees, and the hamstringing
I had
snap of his jaws as the deer tried to flee,
heart
and,
doctor appointment.
with an effort, he pushed the wolves out of his head. These Aes Sedai are going to destroy all of us. Ingtar let his horse fall back beside Perrin's. Sometimes, to Perrin's eyes, the crescent crest on the Shienaran's helmet looked like a Trollocs' horns. Ingtar said softly, "Tell me again what the wolves said." "I've told you 10 times, Perrin muttered. "Tell me again. Anything I may have missed, anything that will help me find the horn." Ingtar drew a breath and let it out slowly. "I must find the Horn of Valere, Perrin. Tell me again." There was no need for Perrin to order it in his mind, not after so many repetitions. He droned it out. Someone or something attacked the Dark Friends in the night and killed those Trollocs we found. His stomach no longer lurched at that. Ravens and vultures were messy feeders. The wolves call him, or it, Shadow Killer. I think it was a man, but they wouldn't go close enough to see clearly. They are not afraid of this Shadow Killer. Awe is more like it. They say the Trollocs now follow Shadow Killer, and they say Fane is with them. Even after so long, the remembered smell of Fane, the feel of the man, made his mouth twist. So the rest of the Dark Friends must be too. Shadow Killer, Ingtar murmured.
Something of the Dark One. Like a Murdroll? I have seen things in the Blight that might be called shadow killers, but did they see nothing else? They would not come close to him. It was not a Fade. I've told you, they will kill a Fade quicker than they will a Trolloc, even if they lose half the pack. Ingtar, the wolves who saw it, passed this to others, then still others before it reached me. I can only tell you what they passed on, and after so many tellings, he let the words die as Uno joined them. A human in the rocks, the one-eyed man said quietly. This far from the waist, Ingtar said incredulously. Uno somehow managed to look offended without changing his expression, and Ingtar added, No, I don't doubt you. I am just surprised. He flaming wanted me to see him, or I likely wouldn't have. Uno sounded disgusted at admitting it. And his bloody face wasn't veiled, so he's not out for killing. When you see one bloody Aiel, there's always more you don't. Suddenly his eye widened. Burn me if it doesn't look like he bloody wants more than to be seen. He pointed. A man had stepped into the way ahead of them. Instantly, Massima's lance dropped to a couch, and he dug his heels into his horse, leaping to a dead gallop in 3 strides. He was not the only one. 4 steel points hurtled toward the man on the ground. Hold! Ingtar shouted. Hold, I said! I'll have the ears of any man who doesn't stop where he stands! Massima pulled in his horse viciously, sawing the reins. The others also stopped in a cloud of dust not 10 paces from the man, their lances still held steady on the man's chest. He raised a hand to wave away the dust as it drifted toward him. It was the first move he had made. He was a tall man, with skin dark from the sun and red hair cut short except for a tail in the back that hung to his shoulders. From his soft, laced knee-high boots to the cloth wrapped loosely around his neck, his clothes were all in shades of brown and gray that would blend into rock or earth. The end of a short-horn bow peeked over his shoulder, and a quiver bristled with arrows at his belt at one side. A long knife hung at the other. In his left hand, he gripped a round hide buckler and 3 short spears, no more than half as long as he was tall, with points fully as long as those of the Shienaran lances. I have no pipers to play the tune, the man announced with a smile. But if you wish the dance. He did not change his stance, but Perrin caught a sudden air of readiness. My name is Urien, of the 2 Spires, Sept of the Rain Aiel. I am a Red Shield. Remember me. Ingtar dismounted and walked forward, removing his helmet. Perrin hesitated only a moment before climbing down to join him. He could not miss the chance to see an Aiel close up. Acting like a black-veiled Aiel. In story after story, Aiel were as deadly and dangerous as Trollocs. Some even said they were all dark friends. But Urien's smile somehow did not look dangerous despite the fact that he seemed poised to leap. His eyes were blue. He looks like Rand. Perrin looked around to see that Mat had joined them too. Maybe Ingtar's right, Mat added quietly. Maybe Rand is an Aiel. Perrin nodded. But it doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't. Mat sounded as if he were talking about something beside what Perrin meant. We are both far from our homes, Ingtar said to the Aiel, and we, at least, have come for other things than fighting. Perrin revised his opinion of Urien's smile. The man actually looked disappointed. As you wish it, Shienaran. Urien turned to Verin, just getting down off her horse, and made an odd bow, digging the points of his spears into the ground and extending his right hand, palm up. His voice became respectful. Wise one, my water is yours. Verin handed her reins to one of the soldiers. She studied the Aiel as she came closer. Why do you call me that? Do you take me for an Aiel? No, wise one. But you have the look of those who have made the journey to Rhydian and survived. The years do not touch the wise ones in the same way as other women, or as they touch men. An excited look appeared on the Aes Sedai's face, but Ingtar spoke impatiently. We are following dark friends in Trollocs, Urien. Have you seen any sign of them? Trollocs? Here? Urien's eyes brightened. It is one of the signs the prophecies speak of. When the Trollocs come out of the Blight again, we will leave the threefold land and take back our places of old. There was muttering from the mounted Shinarans. Urien eyed them with a pride that made him seem to be looking down from a height. The threefold land? Matt said. Theron thought he looked still paler. Not sick exactly, but as if he had been out of the sun too long. You call it the waste, Urien said. To us, it is the threefold land. A shaping stone to make us, a testing ground to prove our worth, and a punishment for the sin. What sin? Matt asked. Theron caught his breath, waiting for the spears in Urien's hand to flash.
And how's
The
your
Aiel
night going, Sasquatch?
So long ago
Hope
it was
everyone's having a
that
good
none
evening
remember.
or morning.
The Wise One and the clan chiefs, they will not speak of it. It must have been a very great sin if they cannot bring themselves to tell us. But the Creator punishes us well. Trollocs, Ingtar persisted. Have you seen Trollocs? Urien shook his head. I would have killed them if I had, but I have seen nothing but the rocks and the sky. Ingtar shook his head, losing interest, but Varen spoke, sharp concentration in her voice. This, Rhydion, what is it? Where is it? How are the girls chosen to go? Urien's face went flat, his eyes hooded. I cannot speak of it, Wise One. In spite of himself, Perrin's hand gripped his axe. There was that in Urien's voice. Ingtard also set himself, ready to reach for his sword, and there was a stir among the mounted men. But Varen stepped up to the Aiel until she was almost touching his chest and looked up into his face. I am not a wise one as you know them, Urien, she said insistently. I am Aes Sedai. Tell me what you can say about Rhydion. The man who had been ready to face 20 men now looked as if he wished for an escape from this one plump woman with graying hair. I can tell you only what is known to all. Rhydion lies in the lands of the Genaiel, the 13th clan. I cannot speak of them except to name them. None may go there save women who wish to become wise ones, or men who wish to be clan chiefs. Perhaps the Genaiel choose among them. I do not know. Many go, few return. And those are marked as what they are. Wise ones or clan chiefs. No more can I say, Aes Sedai. No more. Varen continued to look up at him, pursing her lips. Urien looked at the sky as though he was trying to remember it. Will you slay me now, Aes Sedai? She blinked. What? Will you slay me now? One of the old prophecies says that if ever we fail the Aes Sedai again, they will slay us. I know your power is greater than that of the Wise Ones. The Aiel laughed suddenly, mirthlessly. There was a wild light in his eyes. Bring your lightnings, Aes Sedai. I will dance with them. The Aiel thought he was going to die, and he was not afraid. Perrin realized his mouth was open and closed it with a snap. What I would not give, Varen muttered, gazing up at Urien, to have you in the White Tower, or just willing to talk. Oh, be still, man, I won't harm you, unless you mean to harm me with your talk of dancing. Urien seemed astounded. He looked at the Shinarans, sitting their horses all around, as if he suspected some trick. You are not a maiden of the spear, he said slowly. How could I strike at a woman who has not wedded the spear?
Alright, everyone, gonna call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.